WNST remnants of what's left. It's like a carpet that's been cut up or a jigsaw puzzle missing pieces. The Orioles 2018 season and unraveling continues. Zach Britton dealt off to the New York Yankees mid-game on Tuesday night amidst the raindrops and amidst a really sort of otherworldly empty Camden Yards with the best baseball team on the planet in town in the Boston Red Sox. Luke Jones was there to chronicle it. The Orioles making Zach Britton available, as well as Dan Duquette in the aftermath. You can go listen to all of that out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. We'll also have it here at AM 1570. You know, there's not a lot of sort of code reds or 911s around here, especially in our format on radio. But, you know, when they make a deal like this at 9 o'clock at night or whatever it is, and, the place goes a flutter, it's really weird on a night when there's nobody at the ballpark. The team's 50 games under 500. They get a couple of guys back that maybe someday down the line, but such is what a fire sale looks like, right? Like, welcome to the fire sale.
Well, I mean, we knew this was coming. It was simply a matter of if Zach Britton was going to pitch himself to a level where he would make himself appealing to a playoff contender. And his first couple weeks back with the Orioles, it wasn't looking so great. I think we all think back to that Friday night in Atlanta where the Orioles had the great comeback, and then he gives up, 4 runs in the bottom of the 9th inning. Velocity was so-so. Movement on the sinker wasn't looking great, and it was a reminder that this guy was only about 6 months removed from tearing his Achilles, and at that point in time in December, we were thinking the Orioles weren't going to get anything for Britton. But over the last 6, 7, 8 outings, the sinker velocity much better, the movement much better, and he was looking more and more like the Zach Britton of old. Now, maybe not the 2016 version, but certainly someone that was shaping up to be one of the more attractive bullpen arms on the market. And I think, again, much like we talked about with Manny Machado, considering where the Orioles were with Britton, knowing he was a pending free agent, knowing he was 7 months removed from the torn Achilles tendon, I think they did well for themselves.
Oh, it's unbelievable, right? Like, at no point since December have we predicted them getting much of anything, and certainly that night in Atlanta would have been they're not going to get anything. I mean, this went from nothing to something, right? Like, relatively quickly, more quickly than I think any of us could have imagined back in May when, quite frankly, the season fell apart. When the season fell apart, it felt like this was another dagger that they were going to get nothing for him. And it remains to be seen what these 3 kids are, but by all accounts, this has been a little bit of a kick save for Duquette and the organization all the way around, right? Right.
And just like we talked about with the Machado trade, look, should they have dealt these guys sooner? Yes, we know that. At this point in time, you can lament that and complain about that, and it's justified. But at the same time, given where they are right now, I think you have to be pleased with this. Dylan Tate's kind of the centerpiece in the same way that Yusniel Diaz was the centerpiece of the Machado trade. Tate's the former 4th overall pick. He was in the Carlos Beltran trade a couple years ago, originally drafted by Texas. There are questions about whether he's going to stick as a starting pitcher or whether he'll become a reliever, but it's a guy who has upside still, and is still 24 years old, so not like he's in just a throw-in. Cody Carroll, the other piece that to me is the most appealing in this deal, has really good numbers pitching at AAA Scranton Wilkes-Barre. So he's 25, throws hard, pretty good strikeout rate. He could be a guy that maybe doesn't project as the Orioles closer of the future, but he could be a 7th or 8th inning guy for them.
They expect him on the team next year.
Yeah. I would think there's probably a reasonable chance you'll see him before the season ends,
right?
Considering he was pitching at AAA for the Yankees.
But I don't think about it in terms of, I agree with all that. Any of these guys could come up here and get knocked around in September. I don't care about that. What I care about is, will they be a contributing member of some winning teams in the future? And when I mean winning teams, I mean a team that can be 33-29 on Memorial Day. I'm talking about the next time time the team can be competitive. Forget October, forget World Series. I'm talking about the next time someone will want to reach and buy a ticket to go and see them play baseball thinking that the team is competitive, because that will not be opening day next year, and that probably will not be at any point next year. But if 3 or 4 of these names pop up 2 years from now as part of the roster, all right. I mean, we know what that looks like. That's what these guys were. That's what Adam Jones was. That's what Chris Tillman was. That's what Chris Davis is, despite the fact that we think of him as a $161 million wreck right now. At one point, he was a guy on one of these deals. And I'm all in on all that because look at where the Phillies and the Braves and the Astros and all these other teams have been. It's an easy pitch to say, the little engine that could starts with guys like Cody, whatever this guy's name is, or Neil, whatever his name is in Bowie. That's where it is in 2018. And if you're a baseball fan and have done this long enough, I'll buy in. I'll buy into that they got some talent back.
Yeah, I mean, and at this point they had no other choice. I mean, when you're, you're in that 45 below 500 range in a season that you were trying to win or hoping to win at least, you have no other choice. And I'll say this much. This was the no-brainer part of starting a rebuild. I mean, Manny Machado and Zach Britton. Machado clearly, and Zach Britton with the way he had pitched over the last 3 weeks or so, these were guys that you had to move. There's no sense of being really sharp or really with it by doing this. These are no-brainer type decisions. Now, the question was what kind of value you were going to get. I think the consensus, certainly with the Machado deal and the early reviews of the Britton trade on late Tuesday night, indicated that the Orioles did well for themselves. They indicated that the Orioles got more than Kansas City did for Kelvin Herrera, more than the Mets did for Familia. So in that lens, it's good to see that. And in the lens of understanding how dark the clouds are right now for this organization, which is kind of an interesting irony considering the weather we've had in Baltimore over the last week. But as dark as those
I'm about to build
are,
an arc, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I know, right? But as dark as those clouds currently are overall, there is a little bit of a silver lining with these two deals. Now, they have so much work to do, and really the next steps in this rebuild, as far as who else they might trade between now and the deadline, as far as who's going to be running baseball ops, what's ownership going to look like? Go down the list. Manager, all those different things.
Hence the Dear Orioles series. And by the way, I've penned a Dear Orioles letter to Zach Britton that I hope everybody reads out there. I know Luke is always penning stuff as well. You can subscribe and get it all sent in the morning newspaper. It's all brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness, planetfitness.com, where it's always $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. You get the morning newspaper. It's got the Maryland Jockey Club and the Laurel entries in it for the weekend as well. So appreciation for our sponsors and all of that, but always chock full of good stuff. And, it is sort of anything could happen at any point here, and we were waiting on the Britton thing. And look, the Dodgers other teams were involved, the Astros were involved, the Indians, all these other teams now, we're going to weigh, what players what Chris Widgers were going to be in those deals, right? And that's part of the fun of all of this, too. I'm not shocked that they dealt Britton to the Yankees, but it really speaks volumes to the fact that the Yankees really added the lagniappe, as they would say down in the French Quarter, the 13th donut. The Yankees overpaid for Zach Britton. That's how they got him. That's the nature of these deals. Hey, if you can go fleece the Yankees, I mean, every time I see Rick Dempsey and Scott McGregor, I think of fleecing the Yankees, literally, right? Dippy Martinez, because I'm that old. I've always been the one saying, deal with the Yankees, deal with the Yankees. Well, they dealt within the division for the first time, not first time, but first time in this sort of a way lately. And, let's see what turns of this. We got some Yankee prospects, right?
Yeah. In fact, I saw a great stat. I think it was late Tuesday night. This is the first time, not including waiver-type trades or the trades where you throw in cash or those types of inconsequential moves. This is the first trade between the Orioles and Yankees since Stanley Jefferson was acquired, back in 1989, the why not year. It does speak to, I don't want to call it a turning point because, again, trading Zach Britton was something that was such a no-brainer that you had to do it if you were able to do it. But the fact that it is the Yankees indicates that the Orioles So they certainly weren't going to trade him to the Yankees for an inferior offer compared to what other teams were giving. So,
but I would say this on a perception level, right? The perception amongst you, me, whatever, or even the baseball, nerds of Baseball America who know a lot about this stuff, or just the fans, the fact that you're fleecing the Dodgers and the Yankees, right? There's a part of that comes with a little more shine to say, well, their prospects would be larger, deeper, and the Yankees have this whole Rule 5 issue where they have too many prospects. So going to get their prospects, there is something about that feels a little bit, that's a little bit more sellable to me to say, well, we got eight new guys from these two top prospect organizations where even their top prospects, their number 3 or number 4 might be better than a number 1 or number 2 in our organization. So, there's all of that to be argued. I'm not against anything they've done this month. I'm against the last 25 years of how it's been done, but I am open to saying, well, we're going to follow these guys, and it certainly makes Norfolk and Bowie more interesting next year. It makes camp it makes all of it more interesting if you're a nerd baseball fan, right?
Well, I mean, it just comes down to it, and you made the point a few moments ago talking about what you're seeing with the Phillies and the Astros and what we've seen, or the Phillies and Braves right now, what we've seen with the Cubs and the Astros over the last 3-4 years. And, I mean, it's not just an easier sell when you see that, but the Orioles needed to do this. I mean, there's no need to have an all-star closer when you don't have save situations, when you're a team that's rarely winning games, when your all-star closer is about to become a free agent. So,
but it's always good to have a kicker. But we'll get to that a little later on.
Yeah, right. But again, I mean, these were moves that were no-brainers in terms of needing to move them. But I'm with you from a standpoint of, you can certainly argue they should have traded Machado much sooner. They should have traded Zach Britton. They should have been looking to move him the winter out after he had arguably the best season ever for a relief pitcher, because there's nowhere to go but down in that context. And we've seen that with Britton, with the injuries last year, the Achilles over the off season, a bumpy start for him when he made his 2018 debut. In that context, it is encouraging, and it's good to see them identify two organizations that aren't just really successful right now, but are known for having a lot of depth, or have been known for having a lot of depth in their minor league system over the last 2 to 3 years.
Well, the feeling is these guys have been trained the right way in professional, big-time organization. I mean, it's like Ozzie drafting a kid from Alabama versus Pueblo State, and they both have worked out, right? And sometimes they don't work out, but there's something to say, well, at least that kid played in the SEC. I'd rather fail with Terrence Cody than try to succeed with Ryan Jensen, right?
Yeah, and there's even a little bit at work here where I'll use another Ravens analogy, the Ravens acquiring a veteran wide receiver as opposed to drafting one. Most of these players that they've acquired in these two deals aren't guys that are major leaguers overnight, but they are they are closer to becoming a major leaguer than not in the context of, okay, maybe they could have identified a 19-year-old in the Yankees system that is in low single A right now, who might have more upside, but has a lot of development left. And let's face it, the Orioles haven't exactly been great developing pitching, and specifically starting pitching, I should say. So from that context, if you can acquire some guys that are closer to the major league, who are further along in their development, you hope that they work out. Now, is Dylan Tate going to become a top half of the rotation starter? Probably not, considering he is 24 and he's never been above Double-A. He's had some injuries. He's had some inconsistency. That's why Texas was willing to trade him to the Yankees a couple years ago. That's why the Yankees weren't viewing him in the same light as they do, say, Justice Sheffield. So there's a reason why he was available, but there's still enough intrigue there with him, enough intrigue with the other two pitchers that they acquired in this trade, where you say, you know what, these guys will be in the major leagues at some point in the next year or two. And it is conceivable to the point that you made that come 2021, when you hope the Orioles are at least turning a corner and trending upward at that point in time. I don't think anyone looks at this situation right now and expects they're going to be any good next year, that they're going to be any good in 2020, but you're hoping by 2021 you've turned the corner and you're an ascending major league club rather than where they are right now. And if one or two of these three guys can help you in that regard, in the Machado trade, if Diaz and one or two of those other four prospects that were thrown in can help you, then you're on your way. And you still have a lot of work to do, but you're better now than you were the day before, knowing that Manny Machado was walking out the door at the end of the year, and that you weren't going to give Zach Britton a 3 or 4 year contract as a former All-Star closer who was going to be high priced. So from that standpoint, again, it's not a huge positive, but it's a positive, and it is a silver lining that you can see through the dark clouds that kind of pervade this organization right now with so much uncertainty, really on every level.
Luke Jones joining us here. It is all brought to you by our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast with the coffee, and of course the Rofo Rewards card and app. Now I have the card on my YouTube channel here in our Facebook Live, but you can download the app. Make sure you're doing that when you're pumping your gas. You'll get your fried chicken, you'll get your Western fries, your coffee at a deep discount, or sometimes free when you add up the points. Also brought to you by our friends at King Discount Lakers. Make sure you're giving the King a ring out there. Lottery beer, booze, and the best prices in Baltimore. Get to Rosedale and see Johnny Bev for your summer delights. I picked me up some grown-up root beer and some grown-up cream ale last week, along with my stouts and whatnot. King Discount Liquors in Rosedale. Give the King a ring. Also, I want to say a big thanks to Bill Cole and everything we do around here on Thursday mornings. I am continuing our community and charity series. If you've got a community or charity story out there, it's all brought to you by Cole Roofing and Pfister Energy. And Bill Cole took a little pass this week on the Zach Britton sweepstakes. He's down the beach with his kids eating Thrasher's French fries. But a shout out to Bill Cole and Cole Roofing. He'll be back next week to talk about Ravens and all that good stuff. But they are sponsoring our community and charity series, our ongoing commitment to tell good stories around here. If you have a good story, toss me a note, nasty at WNST.net. Luke and I are talking Zach Britton right now and the exodus of what's left of dealable guys. I don't know that Brock is dealable at this point in the big picture. And I'll get to Britton and the conclusion of him in a moment, but I think it begs the question, what else is next? And I know Duquette talked afterward, Britton talked. You can hear all that in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. Adam Jones, not going to get dealt, maybe, right? I mean, this is nut cut time, dude. This is last 5 days. If the phone's not ringing, what's the old Jimmy Buffett song? If the phone doesn't ring, it's me.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, let's face it. I mean, Adam Jones, as much as he is still someone that I could see helping a contender, someone who has a need for, let's say a corner outfielder or a real need in center field, even though we know defensively he's not where he was a couple years ago and is better off moving to a corner outfield spot. There are complications there. I mean, he's making more money this year than Manny Machado was making. So there's salary, there's the right fit, there's the no trade clause that he has as a 10-5 player. So
it's complicated. There's no doubt about it. I think the money's the most complicated part, right?
Yeah, I think so too.
And whatever they would get back, if you rent Adam Jones, essentially you're going to pay him $6 million or like that, right? Every day he's on your teams, whatever it is, $50,000, $75,000. One of the other reasons that he hasn't been dealt a week ahead of time, because it's probably another $400,000. It's just a lot of money, man. I mean, and one thing not lost on this, and I thought about this in the middle of the night, and I haven't heard about it. You're certainly not going to hear it on Masson, and I haven't heard you and I discuss it. It's how much money the Orioles have shed in the last 5 days with Machado and Britton. They've saved themselves about $8 or $10 million. And $8 or $10 million on these nights where they've got 6,000 people showing up at the ballpark, these are not gate revenue nights anymore. $8 million, $10 million, that is not chump change for an organization that is going to, on paper, lose a lot of money this year. The Orioles are a losing franchise right now. Not Masson, not that money, because of the way this thing is structured, and it's very complex. But I do want to point out, shedding Adam Jones could make this a $12 million savings, maybe $15 million of savings over the last quarter or third of the year for their books It's a big deal. I mean, they would give Adam Jones up for some Delaware River mud right now just to not have to pay him. I believe that.
Well, I mean, and it also just comes down to it. And look, I mean, that's certainly part of it. And I mean, I don't expect this team to have a $150 million payroll next year, which is kind of the territory that they've been in the last couple of years, give or take some money. They were down. Payroll was down a little bit this year from where it was the year before. But I think it is a case with Adam Jones, with Brad Brock, throw in Danny Valencia, as far as pending free agents go. You're not getting much for any of those guys. I mean, if you throw in some money for Adam Jones, maybe you get a kind of a middling prospect, maybe a maybe.
Well, I guess my point is we've gotten all we're going to get, kind of, sort of. Like, sort of,
but
right?
I'll say this, and Dan Duquette was asked about this Tuesday night, and we've, reports have been out there as far as teams being interested in Dylan Bundy and Kevin Gausman, Jonathan Scope, Michael Gibbons. I mean, guys that are under control beyond the 2018 season. Now, that being said, if you ask me right now if I expect any of those individuals to be dealt, I'll say no.
But those guys aren't far off from being good next year and costing you $15 million the following year. I mean, that's where we are with Britton, right? I mean, like, we're not that far out on that if they turn out to be number 3 starters, you're going to have to pay them $12 million a year.
Right. Well, and that's part of the argument, though, to make a trade, because are the Orioles going to be ready to be contenders again by the time Kevin Gausman's hitting free agency in 2 years, by the time Dylan Bundy's hitting free agency in 3 years? We've talked at length about Scope. So perhaps, and I'm just spitballing here, this isn't anything I've heard or anything that's been reported out there, perhaps the key to dealing in Adam Jones is maybe you consider lumping him with a Kevin Gausman to sweeten up the pot for a return. I mean, there are possibilities there, and Duquette was asked about the possibility of dealing players beyond those pending free agents, and he gave a very Dan Duquette-like answer, was non-committal. But the one thing he did say that was interesting about it was part of when you start a rebuild is not just looking at your roster right now, not just looking at your expiring free agents right now, not just looking at players like Cedric Mullins who are on the cusp of being promoted to the big league level, but you're trying to project what your roster looks like in next year, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and you need to see what's going to be best, what's going to be most conducive for your team 3 years down the road. So from that context, that leads me to believe that the Orioles would at least consider dealing some of those individuals. Now, the good news with any of those guys, including Jonathan Scope, who, let's face it, wouldn't exactly say his trade value is at an all-time high, even though he's had a really good month of July, he's had a poor season. So with those individuals, you can be a little more picky in terms of taking a great offer or saying, you know what, we'll wait to the off-season because this isn't a deal that's going to move the meter to the degree that we'd like it to. So, maybe it means you hold off until the winter for Jonathan Scope. Maybe it means, okay, you're still open to dealing Dylan Bundy and Kevin Gausman and Michael Gibbons and go down the list of anyone else you want to throw in there. But you don't have to do that right now because you have them under control for some time. Scope's the one where they should have more urgency, but the others, you're talking about 2, even 3 years of club control. But Duquette at least acknowledging that you have to look at the big picture and look at what rosters are going to be 2 or 3 years from now. And to your point, the cost of those individuals is part of it, certainly. But again, how much value are you really extracting from Kevin Gausman pitching in your rotation the next 2 years as opposed to him going somewhere else and helping someone else that's in contention and getting their Kevin Gausman that might be a year and a half away from the major league. So those are the things that you need to do, but it's at least encouraging to hear the Orioles say that they're not just looking at dealing their pending free agents, but they are open to dealing some of those other individuals because this isn't a one-year fix. Trading Manny Machado and Zach Britton, they've gotten some nice pieces, certainly, and I think they've done well for themselves relative to where they stood and missteps leading up to this point in time. But Yusniel Diaz and Dylan Tate alone aren't rebuilding this farm system or turning this organization around. They're good depth. They're guys that certainly have a chance to be really good contributors for them in the not-too-distant future, but you need to do much more. And you're not in a position where you trade a couple pending free agents and then you reload for next year. That's not how this is going to be done. That's not how it should be done. So it's good to hear them at least acknowledge that, yeah, we'll listen on Kevin Gausman. We'll listen on the possibility of Michael Givens. We'll listen on the possibility of even a Dylan Bundy, who's 3 years of club control left. So I like hearing that, and this not just pigeonholing yourself to saying, oh, we're only going to trade the guys that are walking out the door at the end of this season.
He is Luke Jones. He can be followed at Baltimore Luke, not just for Orioles games and trades and late night and deadline deals coming up next week and heading off to the Hall of Fame next weekend with Ray Lewis. We still have a few seats left, but he is also out with the Ravens, and we'll get to that momentarily as well. And, of course, you can follow everything he does, Luke at WNST.net, as well as Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. All of our WNST programming here brought to you by our friends at Michael's Cafe. Can't wait to get out onto the deck there and have myself a tasty crab cake out of York Road. Of course, we had head coach Barry Trotz, then of the Washington Capitals, then of the lowly, not to ever win the Stanley Cup Washington Capitals, but that was just like 12 weeks ago. We'll be out at Michael's Cafe for some nights as well, heading into the fall here. Beautiful nights outside. If you haven't been to the outdoor deck at Michael's Cafe, you haven't. Check him out at Michael's Cafe. 34 years, getting better all the time. Also brought to you by our friends at Freedmont Mortgage. Carl Delmont. Speaking of Michael's Cafe, I have lunch out there once in a while with Carl. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. You need the right lender. You need our friends at Freedmont. Buying, selling, thinking about it. You got Freedmont's education online at Freedmont.com. We'll hear from Carl Delmont. Get some soccer chatter in here as well. Luke, last thing on Zach Britton before we bid this adieu, as Gary Thorne would say. And I'm looking down at the schedule here. We'll see Zach Britton later on in the month. We get him next week, and then we get him again 4 weeks from now. We'll see plenty of the Yankees around here. I always ask this question, and I know we've talked about this before. Why was he made a relief pitcher again? Like you said, we're looking for starters and starters' clocks going off and all of that. I've never really fully come to terms, even as great a closer as Britton was, as to why it went in that direction. I'm always sort of fascinated when those turn events happen for players, especially when they go from being a pitcher to an outfielder like Adam Lowen or whatever. You make that move. Britton probably could have been a position player. He was a hell of a hitter, a hell of an athlete. He probably could have done a myriad of anything. But it is fascinating how when you measure his career and you equate him with Mattis and with Arrieta and with Tillman, much like I go back to Pulsifer and Isringhausen and I go back to the old A's pitchers, anytime you have sort of that young guns thing, you measure them all a decade later. It is fascinating what they've all become, I think.
It really is, and in some ways, it's funny. I was thinking about this as I was driving home Tuesday night after a long night at the ballpark. There was a rain delay. Some drama in the ninth inning with Brad Brock as Zach Britton watched from the bullpen. I thought there was some irony to that. If only Ubaldo Jimenez had been available to get the save instead. But I was thinking about how Zach Britton, to me, is one of those guys that epitomizes this era of Orioles baseball that's clearly coming to an end. The competitive window's slammed shut already. But you think about where he was. He was kind of that tier, not tier, but time frame right after the famed cavalry with Arrieta and Mattis and Chris Tillman and Brad Bergeson. You kind of go back, to some of those names at that point. But remember, he came up in 2011, got off to a really good start that season, and then, as many starting pitchers do in many places, once the league saw him the second and third time, they figured him out more. Remember, 2012, he had, I believe, the shoulder issue where he missed some time. He struggled when he finally did make it back to the major league level. And 2013, kind of same story, had some inconsistency. Had some physical challenges. One of the reasons why he was moved to the bullpen, besides the fact that he had been pretty underwhelming as a starting pitcher over parts of 3 major league seasons, was he was out of options the spring of 2014. And he was kind of put in the bullpen out of necessity because he was not one of their 5 best starters going into that season. And if you recall that year, early that year, was kind of their multi-inning guy, roughly kind of doing what Mike Wright is doing for the Orioles right now, except the Orioles actually won games and had situations where they would have a long man come in the 5th inning and bridge the gap in a game they were winning. But Tommy
you don't need one Zach Britton. You need 4 of them if you go back to what the Royals did or what the Yankees have now or, what, the Millers and the Chapmans represent and how expensive they are, right? And where the level of commitment. I still think Zach Britton might get a 3-year, $36 million deal from somebody, somewhere, somehow, if he looks like that guy for the next 8 weeks. And he certainly could look like that guy, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that if he looks like at least something resembling the 2016, 2015 version of Britton, he's going to get paid. He's going to get a 3 or 4 year contract. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And certainly, he's going to get a chance. He's going to get a chance to pitch on a big stage. But I think going back to your original question, he epitomizes so much of what the Orioles were over this era. Unconventional, maybe not exactly as planned, but it really worked out well. And I think back to the spring of 2014 when Dave Wallace worked with him. Wallace and Dom Cheedy made a couple adjustments in his delivery, and it's something to this day that he still can't fully explain why the sinker became such an elite pitch. Remember, when he was a starting pitcher, he threw multiple pitches. He had a 4-seamer, he had a 2-seamer. Threw a slider. He had 4 pitches, but the sinker was never anything remotely close to what it became, and it just got to a point where the Orioles and him both thought that he was so successful, why mess with a good thing? Could they have moved him back to the rotation? Maybe, but he wouldn't have been throwing a 96-mile-per-hour sinker if he was being asked to pitch 6 or 7 innings every 5 days. So the genesis of that was kind of out of necessity from a roster standpoint and from a standpoint of he just hadn't been all that terribly good as a starting pitcher other than kind of the first half of 2011. But in the same way that the Orioles, from 12 through 2016, always seemed to be better than, the sum always seemed to be better than the part. He's a guy that, in 2010, 2011, they were hoping he'd be a number 2 starter for them or a number 3 starter for them.
I called him Mr. What If in my Dear Orioles letter. Like, he'll always be Mr. What If. What if he were a starter? What if they would have put him in the game in Toronto? What if they would have signed him? What if they would have dealt him to the Indians last year, the Astros, and what we would have gotten from? What if he didn't tear his Achilles? And now it's gone. It's like Machado. It's like you grabbed for it, and it's like sand, and you look and you're like, oh, I've got Yusniel Diaz out of this, and we're 50 games under 500, and the organization's ripped apart, and we're not really sure any of them know what they're doing. Like, literally, Duquette, okay, a little bit I'll give you, but I don't know that anybody's in the right seat on the ship, from John and Lou Angelos to Mama Angelos to wherever the hell the old man is, to whatever Duquette's doing, to whoever's running the farm, to whatever's going on with the manager or the scouts or the minor league system, or who's calling the shots or who's making the deals or who's signing the players or who's going to own the team. It's really wild watching this, man, because a lot is going to have to go right for them to be a 500 team in 2021. Like, they're going to lose a lot of baseball games here for a long stretch, and they're going to have to really make a lot of great decisions right here, right now, to ever be any good in a world where they're competing with the Red Sox and the Yankees. And quite frankly, they made the Yankees better last night, at least for a little while.
But on the flip side, you say, well, maybe they made them worse 2 years from now. I don't know. Again, these aren't elite prospects that they got, but to the point that you made, look, there is so much uncertainty. There's no question about that. And there's so many reasons to be really concerned, but even understanding that, even acknowledging that, these 2 trades give me some small morsel of hope. Even if it's a case where Dan Duquette did make these trades and and he's basically doing his best, auditioning for his next job. And
well, Sid Thrift was doing his best too, but I'm not going to compare one to the other because I saw that, and that's not what this was. And certainly this has been not hailed throughout baseball, but no one's had a problem with these deals or who these kids are, who these prospects are, or that the Orioles did their homework. So for that, I will tip my cap to whatever they've pulled off the last 8 days and however it turns out. Although I don't agree with that. If Dan Duquette isn't here November 15th running the team, then I will disagree with the methodology on how this happened, always. Sure.
And again, we keep going back to that caveat of considering where they are now. Not
well, this place is effed up. We always start with that, but then we say, but, Donald Trump's president, but, that's kind of how this place runs, literally.
But I will, again, the silver lining is that they did get pretty, returns that have been pretty universally praised as not deals that are turning around this franchise overnight, but good deals for two rental players. And I wouldn't have had the confidence. 2 months ago, neither one of us expressed much confidence that the Orioles were going to get a good return for Machado or a good return for Britton or anyone else they might trade over the next week or anyone they're going to trade come the offseason.
And let's not forget, and I always want to interject this, somewhere Mr. Angelos should be sitting up and saying, now remember, Luke, we saved $9 million. We got rid of, that's a lot of money. Don't forget that part. Because that's going to be part of, if they just take that money that they've saved, and if they could just find someone to take Adam Jones this week, $10, $12 million, that buys a lot of farm directors. That buys a lot of scouting, all of that stuff that they have never really invested their money in, quite frankly.
Sure. And even Dan Duquette has acknowledged at various points over the last year or two that, part of the increase in payroll, has been that they haven't, acknowledging that they haven't done anything on the international market. And, there have been times they've been more active internationally, but they've never been on the forefront there for a long time. But, again, I'll acknowledge some encouragement, some optimism by the sheer fact that they got pretty good returns. Of course, knowing that they're prospects, and you never know for sure until those guys, until Yusniel Diaz is playing right field for the Orioles every day and hitting .290, or if Dylan Tate, in the Orioles rotation a couple years from now. So you never know, but the sheer fact that they've gotten returns that have been universally praised to at least accepted and saying they did pretty well for themselves, rather than, boy, that doesn't look so good. And you're seeing, with the Mets trading Familia, all you heard over the last few days was, man, they really didn't get much for him. So, from that standpoint, it's good to hear that. From the standpoint of the fact that they even dealt a player to the Yankees, looks like some semblance of progress compared to where the organization has been at previous points. So we'll see how it plays out. But one thing I want to throw in there, because we haven't spent a lot of time talking about him other than just what could have been as a starter or what could have been if Britton had gotten into the wild card game 2 years ago. Zach Britton was the longest tenured player in this organization. Was drafted in 2006, was an 18-year-old. And he has been a stand-up guy. He's always handled himself well with the media. He handled himself well 2 years ago when he inexplicably did not pitch in Toronto, but has always been a guy that's been accessible, has always been a class guy, a good teammate, and it's tough to see him go from that standpoint. A guy who's well-liked in that clubhouse, and he even expressed certainly excitement getting to go pitch in a pennant race and joining a bullpen that was already the best in baseball. But he also expressed some sadness, as far as what the Orioles have meant to him, and even
it's all he's ever known, right?
Yeah,
literally.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an emotional thing for a kid like it.
It really is. And look, I understand fans don't really care about the human side of this, but it was an emotional night for him, an emotional night for a number of members of this organization. And
how many times was he on his back in the training room getting his ankle worked, like in the last 8 months to get back to this point, right? So I mean, It's very bittersweet. I can only imagine. I didn't watch that, and you see what it is with football players and with baseball players, but it really is amazing modern science. The fact that he could be out there pitching at this point, it's incredible.
Yeah, it really is. And look, I mean, a pitcher getting back from an Achilles is a little bit different than, say, a linebacker or maybe an outfielder, let's say. But one of the first people that he acknowledged was Brian Ebel, the Orioles trainer, in the work that he put in, the plan that they laid out from the first few days after he had surgery back in December. It really is incredible in that regard. And again, Zach Britton is someone that's going to be missed in the organization. He was a good soldier for a long time, and he even expressed in his final comments before he walked out of the Orioles clubhouse for the final time that some hope that maybe one day he comes back to the Orioles. Expressed the desire that maybe he finishes up his career with the Orioles. Who knows? Maybe 5-6 years down the road, he's their seventh inning reliever, and you'll hear him come out to AC/DC a few more times. But definitely going to be missed, and certainly a big part of the Orioles' success, especially in 2014 and 2016. I mean, he was a godsend for them when they didn't have a closer, when Tommy Hunter struggled in that 14 season. And certainly 2016, I don't think anyone's ever had a better season as a relief pitcher than him. Maybe there's some others that are in that category of being as good, but he very well could have had the greatest season in the history of baseball as far as relief pitchers go. He was just incredible that year, and I mean, I'll say this, the Orioles wouldn't have sniffed that wild card spot if Zach Britton hadn't been their closer in 2006.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, and you can always find him, Luke, at WNST.net, opining on all things Ravens, and, of course, the Orioles, who remain home here this weekend through Tampa Bay, and we'll see Zach Britton next week as they travel off to Yankee Stadium. My Dear Orioles series continues with Zach Britton. You can go read that at WNST.net. If you're interested in joining us on our Ray Lewis trip, I have a handful of seats left for trips A, B, and C. They leave Thursday, Friday, and Saturday next weekend. Plenty of room for you. Throw me a note, nasty at WNST.net. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and always out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. If there's any more deals, you'll get it first on the WNST text service. And, of course, Dennis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, bringing you the SSV on WNST. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.